Is there a correlation between Hiram Abiff and Sequenra Teo?
Yeah, Sequen Enra was a pharaoh he was a Theban pharaoh from just before the Exodus, the great Hyksos Exodus. And Lomas Knight wrote a famous book, Hiram Ki, I think it was called, back in the early 90s, trying to equate Sequen Enra with Hiram Abiff, because they discovered this mummy with the three impacts in his skull identical to Hiram Abiff within Masonic legend. So Hiram Abiff was hit on 3 occasions by the 3 Jewies, and this pharaoh has the same wounds in his head. And he equates right back to the beginning of the Hyksos era. The end of the Hyksos era, when they were pushed out of Egypt, circa sort of 1580 BC. And so they made this equivalence. I mean, it was a nice find, it was a nice story, and they made this equivalence between these two characters. But even then, back in the early 90s, I knew it had to be wrong, because he's on the wrong side. So he was a Theban pharaoh. He was not a Hyksos. And the people who went on the Hyksos, on the Exodus, were the Hyksos. And so surely anything to do with Hiram Abiff and the Israelites, because of course Hiram Abiff was the architect of King David and King Solomon, ought to be a Hyksos pharaoh and not a Egyptian Theban pharaoh. So he's on the wrong side of the dispute. So I did have a look at this. It's interesting that he has the same wounds, but there is a problem in the identification, because Sequen Enra Teo came from the not Dar el Harb. Anyway, the cache of pharaohs that was discovered behind the temple of Hatshepsut, Dar el Bari, I think it's called. Anyway, they were searching there back in the 19th century, and they found a tomb. So they went down into this tomb, dug it out, and they had 2-3 rooms full of pharaohs. So most of the pharaohs we have in the Cairo Museum came from this cache. What happened is during the Solomonic era, when Tanis came to the fore, so this is the United Monarchy, the 21st dynasty, when they came to power, they started threatening the Theban pharaohs, priest kings down in the south, and demanding tribute. And they didn't have enough tribute. So what they did is they discovered King Solomon's mines. And so here we have an account of King Solomon's mines. We know where they are. I've been there. I've been down them. And the trouble is, what is King Solomon's mines? Where are they? If you're thinking in terms of Israel and King Solomon in Jerusalem, it doesn't sort of make sense. Nobody knows where King Solomon's mines is. But if you're talking about Tanis and the 21st dynasty as being the United Monarchy, we know where the gold for this monarchy was coming from. It was coming from Thebes. They were extorting money, tribute, out of Thebes. Otherwise, they would attack them. Basic same thing that happened all over the ancient world. Either we attack you or you give us tribute. And this carried on for a number of years. It's where the wealth of the Tanis pharaohs came from. And they ran out of money. So what to do? Well, they started raiding the tombs of the 18th dynasty. They started raiding the tombs of the pharaohs. as being the only place they could find the wealth to give to the Tanite pharaohs. And we know this happened at exactly this time. All of the 18th dynasty tombs were plundered. And we have the records of it because we have the records from Tanis. We actually have documentation that this was going on at this time. And they say it was going on because robbers were just going into the tombs. And you think, hold on a minute, you know, the Valley of the Kings is just across the river from Thebes. It's an easy place to police. You know, it's a blind valley. It's very easy to police this place. How can you have tomb robbers going up and down this valley, just raiding any tomb that they happen to come across? Doesn't make sense. You would have to have an extremely lawless place for anybody to be able to go into these tombs just willy-nilly and strip them bare. What was going on is this was sanctioned tomb robbing. So it was being done by the state themselves because they needed the cash to give to the Tanite pharaohs. And so they were raiding purposely the tombs of the pharaohs to find enough gold to send up to the north. And we know that gold went up to the north because if you look at the tombs of the Tanite pharaohs, it's full of the goods from the 18th dynasty pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. But they didn't want to destroy the mummies, of course. I mean, they are sons of gods, all of these mummies. And so they took all of the pharaohs out of the tombs and they stuck them in this cache, in these 3 rooms behind the temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari, I think it's called. And so when they opened this, they came across all of these pharaohs, dozens of them, all parked there in these rooms with little notices pinned to them saying who they were. And that's the trouble, because we have a pharaoh here with a little docket on his mummy saying that this guy is Sequenenra Teo. Yeah, but you're reliant on the guy who put the mummy in the room getting the name right. So we're not entirely sure that this was the mummy of the right person. But the problem is he can't be the Hiram Abiff from the 21st. Well, we don't think so, from the 21st century. Well, could he? Yeah, I suppose he could, because it's about the same sort of era. So the tomb robbing was going on in about the 950s BC, the United Monarchy era, the time of the 21st dynasty. And the architect of these pharaohs, who was called Hiram Abiff, was of that era. And so it is possible that he was buried along with all of the other pharaohs in this cache behind the temple of Hatshepsut. So it's possible that he's been misidentified and this was the character, because we have a similarity again. Now, you have to forgive me because I can't remember the exact details, but I equate the 21st dynasty with the United Monarchy. And King David killed his son, Absalom, in the same sort of fashion. So Absalom was the son of King David, and he got hung from a tree because they became enemies. This often happens, you know, in the past. King David and his son were fighting each other. And his son became hung from a tree, if I remember correctly, and then stabbed 3 times in order to ensure that he was dead. And it just so happens that that sounds very, very similar to what happened to Hiram Abiff. It's the same sort of end to this guy. And it's quite possible because he would have been a prince of Egypt, of course. Okay, he was not the favorite son, having just been killed, but he would have had many supporters who would have ensured that he had a fine burial. And it's possible that he was actually buried in the cache with all of the other mummies of the pharaohs. So it might be the correct mummy, but just a misidentification. And it's not Sequenenra. It's actually Absalom, who was the son of Susens the first or the Susens the second, who was Pasiba Kahainit, who is King David. So yeah, the story does match. So it's an interesting story. So you have to read, what's it called now? The Hiram key, see what they say, and then have a look at my Solomon, Pharaoh of Egypt, and compare the two. And there's a lot of synergy between these two stories.
Is there a connection between Hiram, Imram, Amram, in the meaning that he was blessed in some way?
The other Rams, I think, come from the name of Ramesses. So it's a different name. Hiram comes from Heru Atif, which means the son of Horus. Heru Atif. But the other ancestors of King David, there was two. There was one called Ram, and what was the other one called? I forget what they were called now. And I think as ancestors of the 21st dynasty, that they were actually named after Ramesses, that they were the Ramesside kings. So there was two. There was one called Ram, and there was the other one was called Esram, wasn't it? And they match very closely with the ancestors of the 21st dynasty, which would have been the Ramesside kings of the 20th dynasty.